All right, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you all. Welcome to First Amendment. We have the late show. So who's taken a class that finished at 9:45 p.m. before? None of you. Okay. Well, I will bring the energy, as will you. The attendance is running. Please sign in on iClicker. Thank you. If you haven't already, please write your name in big letters so I can see you. I think I know all of your names, at least most of you, but I will get them down pretty quick. So only a few of you. Any questions? All right. I've also given you all a pocket constitution. Turn to the First Amendment. Turn. It's right there. It's in there. It's the first one. Can't miss it. So what's remarkable at this class is we will spend the entire semester on like a single sentence. It's true. I'll just read it to you. Let's start the text. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech. Oh, you're still flipping to it. All right. Let me know when you found it. I'll start again. That's okay. Call it the page number. 65. Thank you. Got it? So we will spend the entire semester on just this one sentence. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government redress of grievances. So let's focus in particular on the language of the free speech clause. Okay, we start at 7:45, okay? Good. All right, it begins, and please sit in one of the first two rows where there's an empty seat. Thank you. Congress shall make no law, ... abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Right? There's very few words, but a lot that's conveyed. What's the very first word? Congress. Right? As I'm sure you all took in. Have you all taken common law? Are you taking it now? You've all taken common law? Good. So as you probably remember, under the original design of the Constitution, the first 10 amendments, Bill of Rights, applied only to which branch of government? The federal government. The First Amendment makes this express that it talks about Congress and not the states. This would change after the 14th Amendment. What's the next few words? Shall make no law. Make no law. Which branch of government makes the law? Well, of course, Congress. Does this text refer to the executive branch? Does it discuss enforcement of laws? Does it talk about the courts? Can courts issue injunctions preventing people from speaking? Or does it only affect laws made by Congress? And what does it mean, shall make no law? Can there be no restriction on speech? Is it an absolute right that trumps everything? We know from the case today that's not the case. What does it mean to say no law? Let's keep going. Abridging, right? What does it mean to abridge? Does it mean to violate, reduce, minimize? Right? What does it mean to abridge? Then we have this phrase, the freedom of speech. Not just freedom of speech, the freedom of speech. Why the word "the" there? It suggests that whatever this freedom of speech is, it's known, right? It's the freedom of speech. It's a content that people know about. It existed before the Constitution was ratified. It existed before the Bill of Rights. What is this freedom of speech? Where does this right come from? How do we know what it is? Does the Constitution define it? It doesn't. And not only freedom of the speech, but also freedom of the press. You know, what is the press? You think, oh, the press, literally, printing press, right? Gutenberg, right? You would take a device, you'd crank it out, and it would spit out pieces of paper, pamphlets, right? The Federalist Papers were pamphlets. So at a minimum, this provision protects the freedom of the press, the printing press. But does it go beyond the printing press? Does the freedom of speech of the press limited to the printed word, the spoken word, art, music, poetry, video games, writing about socialism, writing about evils of government? Does it apply to generative AI, right? Is it only what we've understood as speech in the 1790s? Or does it include modern modes of expression? Does it include pornography, obscenity, hate speech? Does it include violent video games, protesting at military funerals, right? What is the scope of the freedom of speech? Now, you may all be textualists, maybe you're not, it doesn't really matter to me, but the text here doesn't get us very far. And I think what you'll find is that in the First Amendment context, there's not a lot of history that's sort of baked into the cases. You may see in other contexts about originalism, you know, what do the framers understand? That doesn't get us too far. The First Amendment cases we'll study in this class are very much a product of judicial decision-making. Courts, as I often say, just sort of making stuff up. If you read the decisions by Justice Holmes, in one case he goes one way, another case he goes another way. We won't try and reconcile them, we will. But these are not decisions that might be called formalist. It's about judges literally balancing what they think are important aspects of society, right? What's more important? The power of the state to put down dangerous speech, or the power of people and the need to criticize the government itself, right? What is the more important value? And I think you'll find that this class, again, is sort of different than common law, in that there are not many straight rules. There's a lot of tests, a lot of tests. You're going to hate all the tests. And a lot of these tests don't line up. And you, oh, a four-factor test, that's great. Oh, no, it's not great, right? The tests are often incoherent. You also won't like the fact that over the course of the decades, the court goes different ways on speech. So if I ask you a question in 1920, might go one way, 1950 is another way, 60 is a third way, 80 is a different way, and modern a different way. The court meanders and wanders through these topics in a way that's not always coherent. So what we'll try to do in this case as best I can is focus on what we call the sort of the key cases, or if you will, the cases that everyone should know, right? These are sort of the foundational cases in First Amendment law that people should be familiar with. But I don't want to even give you the impression that if you sit through this class and you do really well, you will know all First Amendment law. You won't. I only have 2 hours, late at night it seems, to cover a lot of material. All right, so the first, I don't know, half of the semester will be focusing on speech and press. We'll then do about a quarter of the class on free exercise religion, and then the remainder on the Establishment Clause. Religion and the Establishment Clause in particular have changed a lot in the last couple of years. The Roberts Court has become very, very robust on the religion clauses. The speech stuff is still pretty constant, but things are moving around a bit. All right. So any questions so far? All right. Anyone happy before? A couple people I recognize, few faces. So the way I do the recitation, unfortunately, I'm sorry, is that you go up and down the row. So Amy, Jonathan, Nick, Cody, Dylan, need a name tag, just fill it out if you can, please. Shayna and Eric. Oh, I'm sorry, Shania. Thank you. Shania, I'll try to remember that right. And what's the name over there? Jamar, Aaron, Addie, Julianne, Ryan, Anna, Lee. All right, I'll try and get the names pretty quick. Just don't lose those name tags and just humor me if I script your name. So I'll go up and down the rows. You'll each get one or more questions. I do this because I want everyone to be involved in every class. If you're not prepared, I will probably just move on and I'll come back to you later at a time of my choosing. So that sort of ad term effect is always present. Jacob, thank you, sir. Everyone's on call. There's no passes. You can't request an off day. That's not a thing. This is real world. You don't get to take time off from work if you're not prepared. I know you always ask about this, but the exam, it's a final exam. It's going to be 2 hours in person, all essay. This people write down, right? It's on the syllabus. So if you read the syllabus, you see it. Open book. Bring whatever you want. It will not help you. It will not help you at all. In fact, if you're looking at your notes in the exam, you're probably doing the wrong thing. There'll be one or two essay questions I haven't decided yet. I'll let you know later. I post online some of my old midterms and old exams, which you can use as models. You should look at those. I just caution you, I change my syllabus every year, so there might be some case that I covered 4 years ago that I didn't cover this year, so it might be different, but I'll at least give you this sort of approach. We meet every night. We'll start right on time, 7:45. We'll finish 9:45. If I finish early, it'll be not on purpose, but due to the randomness of class. All right. Questions? And when my friend John's in the back row, he's a friend from DC visiting, so I had a John. All righty. Hi, Amy.
Hi.
Hi. So let's go back to a case that you guys studied, Marbury. That's not the reading, I know. But do you remember the facts of Marbury, how the case sort of arose? Why do we have Marbury versus Madison?
I don't remember all the facts of that case. It was referenced.
It was. But do you remember, who was Marbury? Do you remember? It wasn't the reading, so it's fair. Anyone? Okay, who was Marbury? Yeah. Nick, good.
He was a justice of the peace.
Very good. And why was Mr. Marbury unhappy?
He didn't get his commission.
He did not get his commission. John, right? Getting a commission takes a long time, right? It takes a long time to get your commission. So, but why didn't he get his commission? Do you remember that one?
It was because Jefferson didn't want to give it to him.
That's exactly right. Right. So the backdrop, and Amy, it was only a fair question because you didn't read it, but so I apologize. The background of Marbury had to do with this clash of government. So who was the first president? Everyone knows George Washington, right? Everyone knows George Washington. Who was the second president? John Adams, right? John Adams, right? Adams was a member of what's called the Federalist Party, right? Which is not exactly Federalist Papers, but it's in the ballpark, right? It favored a strong national government. And then who was the vice president under John Adams? It was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was of a different party, of the Democratic Republican Party, and they hated each other. They were lifelong foes. I would say, wait a minute, Josh, why would the vice president and the president hate each other? Under the original Constitution, as was designed, presidents did not run on a ticket. What happened is the person who had the most votes would be president, and the runner-up was VP. You think that makes sense? No, it did not. They changed one pretty quickly with the 12th Amendment, right? But that was the original design. So you had John Adams, president, Federalist, and then you had Thomas Jefferson, vice president, Democratic Republican. And they hated each other. And there were these huge clashes between the parties. And a lot of this sort of tension gave rise to a series of laws passed in the late 1790s. What are broadly called the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, the Alien Acts are not really relevant for our class during the reading, but these were laws that said if you're not in the country legally, we can remove you. And if you're a citizen of an enemy nation, that is a nation we're at war with, we can remove you. That's not really relevant for this class. What is relevant for this class is what's called the Sedition Act. And these were laws passed with the not so hidden motive of punishing the Democratic Republicans, right? Of punishing those who oppose the incumbent government, the Federalist Party. So, Amy, I'll come back to you. What was the Sedition Act, just generally speaking?
So it prohibited any person from unlawfully combining or conspiring together with intent to oppose any measure or measures.
In your own words, just your own words. What? No, that's okay.
Just opposing the government. And,
By what means? By taking up arms?
no, it could be any kind of conversation.
Good.
Or collaboration, just any opposition at all.
Very good. Thank you, Amy. So the law made it a crime to writing, printing, uttering, or publishing any false, scandalous, and malicious writing against the government of the United States that would bring the government, the president, or Congress into contempt or disrepute. Right? So, Jonathan, what, just in plain English, what did this statute do? What did it actually criminalize?
Just any sort of dissent against the majority.
Is it dissenting or something specifically? Is it enough to say that I disagree with the government? Is that enough to trigger criminal liability under the statute?
No.
You got to do something more. What do you have to do?
Just publish it.
Oh, yeah, you have to publish it for sure. But what types of utterances do you have to make that would trigger liability here?
Anything scandalous.
There we go. What does scandalous mean? False, scandalous, malicious. What do these words mean?
Something that is more dangerously destructive of political.
If you say something true, is that grounds for punishment?
No.
No. So this is a contrast. In the English system, it was actually a crime to say true things that were critical of the government. And it's considered bad because if it was true, that means that we have really shut down, right? We can't let people say true things. So at least the US system was different. It's false. But false, scandalous, and malicious. It's information or some sort of statement that brings the government into some sort of a negative connotation. I think of false light, if your memory from torts is in the ballpark, right? It's something that casts the government in a negative or false light. But it's got to be malicious. It's got to be negative with intent to defame the said government. All right. If it's true, that arguably is a defense to it. It's got to be false. Now, as we all know in politics, truth and falsiness is often a matter of dispute, isn't it? You have these fact checkers. Oh, this is fact. 3 Pinocchios, 4 Pinocchios, right? This is not always black and white. That's true in the 1790s and true today. But at least it was unlike the British version of sedition, where truth was a defense. So what ended up happening? The Adams administration went after a bunch of Republicans, the Jeffersonians, and they prosecuted them for criticizing the government. And they had their motives. Said, well, we think that the Jeffersonians are trying to let the French come into our government and to basically punish our system and to try and corrupt our system, right? So it's these sort of accusations. We also know is that there were many Federalist judges, not Mr. Marbury, but others who upheld these prosecutions. Even John Marshall, the beloved judge. By the way, I'm not a big John Marshall fan. I will criticize him a lot this semester, but John Marshall upheld convictions under the Sedition Act. Justice Chase, not Chief Justice Chase, Justice Chase upheld convictions under the Sedition Act. So what do you do, Nick, if you are a citizen in the 1790s and you have the federal government prosecuting people for free speech, and you have the federal judiciary upholding these convictions? What do you do? How do you respond to this sort of violation? What you think are your freedoms?
Well, you could try to bring suit.
Who are you going to sue? The courts are in the Federalist Party's pocket. I shouldn't say that. The courts are in favor of the Federalist Party. They support these laws. Who are you going to sue? You can't sue the government. I love, Nick, I love law students who think everything can be resolved in court. Ain't true, right? I know you're all lawyers. Most things are not going to be good for court. So, Nick, that's a question again. Again, you are a citizen. You see these laws. You see these unjust prosecutions. You see your fellow party members being thrown in jail, being fined. What do you do?
Try to contact your local congressman if they're not.
They're all Federalists.
Okay.
Now that would happen. We all know the election of 1800. This was the key election. In 1800, the Federalists were thrown out of power, and they elected Republicans in large part because of the Sedition Act. These laws were unpopular. So we know that electoral politics matter. And if you favor these politics, the Federalist Party died. It never came back to power, right? Cody, so we have election in 2 years. You can't get any sooner to get your guy out of office. What do you do if the courts are upholding this and you can't change Congress midstream? What do you do?
My instinct is just be quiet.
Fascinating answer. What do you mean be quiet?
You're just gonna have to lay low until you can get everyone together to change, to bring change.
So that means the sedition work was doing its part. It was working, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's a good answer. Dylan, what do you do? Well, let me ask more questions. What was actually done in response to the Sedition and Alien Acts?
The Virginia resolution and Kentucky resolution.
Now, I want to go back to Cody's point because I think he made a fair point. He said you stay quiet. Did the authors of these resolutions sign them, Cody? No. So they kind of did lay low, didn't they? That's interesting how you put it. All right, so Dylan, we'll get into the specifics of what these resolutions said, but what, at a high level, what did the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions attempt to accomplish? What was their goal?
To basically say that, to say that they didn't agree with the Alien Sedition Acts and say that they weren't constitutional.
Have you ever seen something like this before? I mean, you've been in law school now for a year or so, year and a half. Have you ever seen states writing these documents saying that a law is unconstitutional? Have you ever see this? Usually if a state thinks a law is unconstitutional, what do?
They don't follow it.
Oh. What did Nick say? What do usually states do? God bless Texas. What does Texas do if they don't like a law?
You secede.
Not what I was looking for, but yeah. Well, look, you can secede. Jacob, what do states usually do when they're unhappy with the law? They think it's unconstitutional. Where do you usually go?
Supreme Court.
They go to the courts, right? They try to litigate the issue. But the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions were not litigation, were they?
No,
What were they?
just like a publication, right?
A publication. Was it a statute? Was that any force of law?
No,
Could a state override a federal law? Is that even possible?
no.
No, we got supremacy clause, right? Remember McCulloch v. Maryland, right? Crick v. Pennsylvania, ring a bell? States cannot trump federal laws. So, Shania, what did the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions try to actually do?
They try to change the, beliefs of the other states and try to get them to not enforce these laws and recognize that people do have the right and that the federal government shouldn't be stepping on their criticisms.
I actually really like the way you described it. I think you said, if I remember, they tried to change the way the other states saw the law. Is that what you said? Okay, good. No, I can replay in my head. That's what you said, right? I like the way that she framed that. So a common sort of criticism of the Sedition Acts, of the resolutions, is that they tried to nullify federal law. And if you read our book, Randy and I, oh, by the way, Randy Barnett and I are the authors of the book. Not important, but if I say we, I'm talking about me and Randy. So it's often said that these were resolutions to nullify, that is, basically wipe out federal laws. I don't think that's right. If you can read them, they're black and white. I don't think Jefferson and Madison said that. But the way I read that is saying that, look, we're states. We have an understanding that this is unconstitutional. We are communicating this to the other states. In fact, they said, we want you to send this document to the other states, right? To transmit to the other states and to the federal government. And it's a recognition that constitutional law is not only what the courts can do. right? Madison said, he said, look, courts can declare laws unconstitutional. He wasn't doubting that principle. This is even before Marbury. But it's a recognition that the states have the power to sort of articulate the failings of a statute that might be unconstitutional. That's exactly what Jefferson and Madison were trying to do. And I think what they're saying is, we're saying this now when we're out of power, but we're laying a marker down. Because at some point, maybe we will be in power and we will be able to take action, which is exactly what happened. Right after the election of 1800, the statute was repealed. Jefferson pardoned those who were convicted under the statute. In fact, Jefferson actually paid off a lot of their fines as well. So actions were taken saying this is not right. So I like starting the semester at this point because it teaches an appreciable lesson that I think most law students lose. The courts do not have a monopoly on the Constitution. If I could tattoo them on my forehead, I would, right? It look weird like Charles Manson, but the courts do not have a monopoly. Do you know who Charles Manson is? Please, thank God. Okay, good. The courts do not have a monopoly. The courts do not have a monopoly on the Constitution. And what these documents reflect is that even in the early stages, only a decade after ratification, that the people still can say, we know what the Constitution means, we disagree. All right, so Eric, let's start with Virginia. And it's known now that Virginia was written by James Madison. Madison was, of course, the member of Congress. He served as the Secretary of State under Thomas Jefferson. He would become president for 2 terms. Very influential guy. What was Madison's argument about why the Sedition Act was a violation of the First Amendment, Eric?
What I think is that he does mention that it bridges, obviously, and it abridges basically freedom of speech.
Okay, it bridges freedom of speech. What are the sort of the 2 conceptions of free speech that are discussed here? How does it abridge the freedom of speech? Let me ask the question differently, Eric. Does this statute prohibit you from criticizing the government? Does it stop you from criticizing the government?
Well,
answer carefully.
yes, it depends, but
Does this law put out an injunction saying that you cannot speak about the government? What does it actually do?
apply the text, obviously punishing.
Ooh, punish.
Yes.
Let me ask the question again. Does it prevent you from speaking ill of the government?
In a way, yes.
It doesn't. So the way the English law works, it says you can't even utter these words. What does the American law do? It says if you utter these words, consequences follow. There's an important distinction in free speech law between what's called a prior restraint, prior meaning before. Prior restraint is a speech restraint before, versus punishing after the fact. In the American system, right, the American system of laws, we do not permit, we generally don't permit prior restraints of speech. That is, a court issuing an injunction saying you can't even speak ill of the government. But you know what? If you do speak ill of the government, it can punish you after the fact. So that's an important way in which our system deviated from the English system. Right? So it does abridge the freedom of speech, not by imposing a prior restraint, but by allowing the government to come in after the fact and impose a punishment, a consequence. Okay? Jamar, what other points does Madison make about why the Sedition Act is unconstitutional?
There was no power granted by Congress to do it.
Good. Just spell that out a little bit more, please. You're exactly right.
In the enumerated powers of the Constitution, there was no power delegated to them to make that law.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you. This is a not obvious point. So you all took common law, and probably the first quarter of the semester was about enumerated powers, right? Ringing a bell? You have the Commerce Clause, right? And you have the Necessary and Proper Clause, and Lord help us, the taxing power. There's no taxing clause. Right? The taxing power, right? And all these provisions are under an umbrella. It is Congress has enumerated powers. Go to Article 1, Section 8. There are about 17 clauses. That's it. If it's not in there, Congress can't do it. Right? Congress has no general police power. If that sounds familiar, the states might have a police power, but Congress does not. So let me give you just a thought experiment, right? Constitution was ratified 1788. First Congress meets 1789. When is the First Amendment ratified? 2 years later, 1791. So again, Congress meets 1789. First Amendment ratified 1791. There's a 2-year gap. There was no First Amendment. So ask yourselves, what if the very first Congress had passed the Sedition Act? Very first Congress, 1789. Again, there's no First Amendment. Would it be unconstitutional? Tell me why.
If they had passed that instead of the First Amendment that we have now,
Yeah, there was never First Amendment. It didn't exist. Wiped out the books.
I guess would still be unconstitutional
Can you tell me why?
because it wasn't power granted to the.
What power would have given Congress the ability to punish speech?
Necessary and proper.
Oh, you're a good answer. I love it. I love it. Madison says that there's no enumerated power to pass a statute. You might also remember from McCulloch against Maryland. Did you guys study the Jeffersonian and Madisonian petition, McCulloch? Right. So John Marshall gets all the credit, but he saw everything from Hamilton, right? If there's ever a good idea that Marshall had was from Hamilton, trust me on this one. Federal 78 in Marbury, McCulloch, Maryland, Hamilton's bank opinion. The guy was not very. Oh, I'll say this: Marshall's overrated. I'll say that much. Very overrated. Probably the most overrated justice after Oliver Wendell Holmes. You guys just put your. It's true. So look, Madison took a very narrow view of enumerated powers. He read the Necessary and Proper Clause very strictly. So I think Madison would have said that the Necessary and Proper Clause did not give Congress the power to pass a Sedition Act. I think Hamilton would have said, yeah, it's necessary and proper, it's good enough, foreign commerce, it's good enough, just keep out the intrigues. But there's a good argument that the separation of powers itself protects free speech, right? That you don't even need these provisions of the Bill of Rights. Justice Scalia would always say that if you go around the world and you look at every country, they have these beautiful Bill of Rights with all these lovely rights. Go to the Soviet Union, they had a really nice constitution. It's just all these rights protected, right? Right to housing, right to this, right to that. It's just awesome, right? But it's all just fake. It's what Madison called parchment barriers, just paper. It's not real. What actually matters is structural provisions of the Constitution. So what Madison's saying is the way to protect free speech is the structure, the separation of powers. If you limit what Congress can do, they can't ban your speech. Don't depend on some judge deciding what free speech is. You can't ban speech because you don't have the power. And that's one of Madison's most powerful points. Okay. All right. Aaron, what does interpose mean? Interpose or interposition? What does this word mean? It's not a word that probably you've seen before. I've never seen it before. Interpose.
In the text of the Virginia resolution?
Yes, sir. What does interposition, interpose mean?
Connection to?
Not really. Addie, I'll come back to you. What's interpose mean?
Well, okay, they said, so I think it means like to get in the way of, like, or to get in between, but really, they didn't say that they would like do anything to stop it. They said, we'll.
Who's they? You keep saying they.
Well, for him, Madison, when he wrote this, well, who's talking about what the state's gonna do, said that like they would appeal to like disposition of the other states, so I kind of
Okay.
thought that's what they were doing to interpose.
Julianne, what do you think interposition means?
I think it means that the states have a duty to kind of step in the way to prevent
Yeah, I think.
Congress from doing something.
Yeah, I think the two of you just got it right. So think of intervention. That's how I always understand it, right? Interpose, comic intervention. It's the state governments asserting the right of their people as against the central government. Interpose does not mean to stop the federal government. So it's not quite, they're not blocking the enforcement of the Sedition Act. It's more about asserting their rights and declaring what their rights are, right? And so Madison only was trying to assert the rights of Virginia. I'll come back to you, Aaron. So Jefferson in the Kentucky Resolution does use the phrase nullification. And that word, especially in the post-Civil War context, has a very loaded connotation. What does nullify mean, or nullification, Aaron?
To make void.
To void, yeah. Aaron, can a state void or invalidate a federal statute?
No.
No, they can't. So usually the word nullify has that sort of meaning, right? To wipe out, to void, to invalidate, if you will. It's not clear to me that Jefferson used in that context. And I think he was using more to protest against it. But a lot of people did understand it and do understand it, say that he's trying to wipe it out. But Jefferson was a little bit more brash than was Madison with Kentucky. And he was saying that this amounts to a form of tyranny, right? An annihilation of state governments. All right. All right, I think we're good. Questions on Virginia and Kentucky resolutions? I mean, why do I start the semester with these documents? I think they demonstrate that even at the earliest junctures, people recognize the power of the state to limit speech and the importance of free speech to try to push back against that power. Okay. All right, so 1800 happens. Any questions? All right, okay. 1800 happens. Jefferson wins. Adams leaves town. Republicans paid the fines those who were prosecuted. Jefferson pardons those who were convicted. And then Madison puts out this report that defends the Virginia Resolution. And again, he articulates how the American conception of speech is broader than the English conception of speech, that we do not permit prior restraint, and we don't permit punishing after the fact for free speech, that the American conception is broader than the English conception. And also gets to the sort of wording. It says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Madison says it's not only about Congress making laws, so it's also about the executive branch enforcing the laws. So it's understood, at least from Madison, that all state action is subject to the First Amendment. Even judges, right? When judges issue injunctions and the like, judges have to account for free speech. They can't punish you for engaging in protected speech. Okay? All right. I think we're about done with this one. Questions on Madison, Jefferson, the Sedition Act, and Virginia, Kentucky resolutions? And just for you to know, and this is in the syllabus as well, when I ask an exam question, I can be tricky. And I might say, you know, the year is 2024. Answer this question based on current law. I could also say the year is 1798. The year is 1800. I once gave a common law exam where I said the year is 1787. The Constitution has not been ratified yet. It was a good exam. People hated me, but it was a good exam. So don't forget about the sort of lessons that, which is the last 45 minutes or so. This is all, it's all good to know. All right. All right, good. All right, so we go from the Sedition Act of 1798 to the Espionage Act during World War I. And I say this out of an abundance of caution. In the early 20th century, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? We had the Great War. It wasn't called World War I yet because we didn't number it. We had the Great War against Germany. And around the same time in Russia, they had a revolution, a Soviet revolution. Communism was sweeping the continent. It was a very vigorous socialist element in the United States. And a lot of the socialists favored Russia. And dare I say, they opposed the American government. They wanted to have a socialist government here. During World War I, there was a lot of opposition to the war. This was really the first draft that we'd had since the Civil War. And many people vigorously opposed the draft. They opposed munitions factories. They opposed people making bombs and tanks and airplanes. So the Wilson administration, President Woodrow Wilson, vigorously enforced the Espionage Act. And the Espionage Act was broadly written to make it a crime to basically frustrate American efforts. But the law didn't just apply to people, for example, who blew up factories and, transmitted secret messages to the Soviets or to the Germans. The law also applied to those who engaged in speech. So in many regards, the Espionage Act was similar to the Sedition Act of 1798. And think of it this way, the Supreme Court, the courts had never declared the Sedition Act unconstitutional. You have Virginia and Kentucky, but there's really no court ruling. And until you get to the 1930s, you really had no First Amendment case law. So really the beginning, the sort of the genesis, the origin story, if you will, of the First Amendment is World War I. This is really where it got its start. And it got its start with cases, the criminal prosecutions, not people suing the government, criminal prosecutions for the enforcement of speech. All right. Is that Ryan over there?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
All right, Ryan. So just start off. What exactly did the Espionage Act criminalize or prohibit?
Any kind of person that was any critique of the war effort that would hamper the effort on the United States part?
Right. So was it just criticism of the war effort or something more?
Or an action that they thought or they considered to be detrimental to the war effort, like actually.
Okay,
hurting the
so
war effort.
this point's actually important. What if, imagine a person just stood in an empty field and was screaming, "I oppose the war," and no one was there to even hear it?
No.
Would that run afoul of the statute? Why not?
Because it's not directly affecting the war effort.
Okay, this is an important point. Does it matter whether you intend to affect the war effort, or does it matter whether you actually have the consequence of doing so? In other words, what if I intend to have the war effort, I print up 1,000 copies of my pamphlet and no one reads it? What actually matters here? Is it the intent or actually having the consequence of causing an effective war effort?
The act of causing the effect of.
So if I intend, but again, I print up 1,000 flyers and no one picks them up, no one even reads them, am I guilty?
Well,
It's actually a really difficult question. There's not actually an easy answer to your question. I'm giving you a hard time, Ryan. I see you're struggling. I'll get you off the hook. This is a hard question, right? In speech cases, there's often a huge gap between what one person intends and what actually happens. Because imagine you have the flip side. Let's say a person says, "I want to overthrow the U.S. government." That's what I want to do. And I posted on my Twitter account, "Overthrow the U.S. government," right? Or in the old days, you put 1,000 flyers in the street and no one reads it. No one even cares who you are. Have you actually obstructed the war effort? Okay, another hypothetical. You give a speech and you simply say, I think war is unjust. I can think of no more protected statement. I think war is unjust. And people hear that speech, say, you know what? He's right. Let's go on strike and let's shut down the factories. There's often a disconnect between the words that are uttered, the intent of the person who speaks them, what actually happens. And I hate to make things about current events, but I was looking at my notes. I taught this class last time on January 12th of 2021. We were in the middle of an impeachment trial at the time. But one of the issues then is, the speech on January 6th. What was the intent of the speech? What was the consequence of the speech? Some of the words said go peacefully, other ones said fight like hell. So whether you're in 1790s, 1920s, or 2000 and whatever the modern year is, I don't know what day of the week it is. I think it's Monday, right? Speech is difficult because you have to focus on the words that are spoken, the intentions of those who speak them, and then the likely consequences of what will happen. And if you read these Holmes opinions, we'll do a couple of them today. I think Holmes actually struggles with this between Schenck and Debs and Abrams. Okay. All right, Anna, let's go to you, please. Give us the facts, please, in Schenck, if you could.
So Schenck, he said he circulated literature that urged people to resist the military draft, and he said that it was kind of like slavery, and so it violated the 13th Amendment.
And this is not a frivolous argument, right? There's actually litigation on this point. The argument is that the government can force you to participate in a war. You're basically conscripting you. You're basically forcing your body into slavery. The Supreme Court rejected this argument, but to this day, people make this sort of argument. You would think that he is just, making a point about constitutional law. But why did Leighton? Is it Leighton? Yeah, Leighton. Why did the government indict him for basically saying that the draft is unconstitutional? That's all he did. All he did. If he just said the draft is unconstitutional, would he have been thrown in jail?
I don't think so.
Okay, tell me why.
Because it was, I guess, actually effective in.
Ooh, effective. That's an important. What do you mean effective?
People were actually discouraged from blindly going into the draft, participating.
All right, so I'm going to ask you now, right? This is actually a very hard question, which maybe I've thought before. What makes speech effective? Lots of people say lots of stuff, but only this guy got sent to jail. What makes speech effective?
I would guess when the intent of the words matches what actually happened.
But that's sort of looking at after the fact. Some people are very, very effective speakers, right? We all know they're good public speakers. What makes an effective public speaker? In advance, we know after the fact people listen to was effective, but what makes an effective speaker? That's the word you use. I'm using your words.
It moves somebody from one position to another.
Oh, it moves them. Amy, come back to you. What does it mean to move someone?
Call to action.
It wasn't any good. I like that. It wasn't a call to action.
And build the passion in them.
Passion. Yeah, I don't do that, right? I'm not good at building passion. No, right, John, no listens to me. Lord help them. You've all been around the block, right? You've all existed for some time on this lovely planet, and you've seen good speakers, you've seen some bad speakers, right? You've seen some good teachers, and you've seen some not so good teachers. What's the difference between a good speaker and a bad speaker? I like what you said, call to action, move passions. Some people are able to connect with their words, whether it's a printed word or a spoken word, or even a tweet, right? I don't care what medium you use. Some people are very powerful with their words, and they can connect with people and call them to act. God love you. Okay, Charles Manson, exactly, yeah. Who the hell hell is Charles Manson? He was a serial killer. Had this little flock of people that followed him. He had little Manson's army, right? These little people that followed him. You know, he's nothing to look at. Got a swastika burned on his forehead, right? But people still flock to him. And that's what speech is, right? Speech is the power to move people. And that's why it's so dangerous. You've heard the pencil is mightier than the sword, right? The pen's mightier than the sword. Why? Because with a single leaflet, a pamphlet, you can overthrow a government. Don't believe me? Go look through American history, right? Go through world history. Words are more powerful than any gun you'll ever have. And that's why they try. The incumbent, the party in power, tries to prevent criticism. Because you move someone, you affect one. And this is reflected in the test. It's not enough to just say a word that's critical of the government. It's you have to say some word that has some sort of a consequence or an effect. Again, if I go in a field by myself and start yelling, oppose the war, draft's unconstitutional, I'm not getting indicted. But if I'm standing at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial in front of 100,000 people and I'm urging them to oppose the war and there's passion, right? And people are fervently listening, it affects people. Or I don't know if you're on Zoom, whatever people do nowadays, right? Are any of you taking Zoom classes out of curiosity? I'd like them.
I think it's interesting.
I love that word.
It's hard to do Zoom from home when my animals are being disrupted.
Oh, that's right, all the animals. Remember you told me about this. Okay.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I think it depends on the course.
Yeah.
To whether or not it works.
So getting people riled up on Zoom, maybe it's possible. I've not been successful yet, but it's possible. There's a human connection. I actually will not teach a Zoom class. They asked me again. I said no. But what do I know? It'd be easier. I'd be at home, nice and quiet, not here at 9 o'clock o'clock. But anyway, there's power. So we have to think about, again, the words that are chosen, the intentions behind the words, and what happens. Because I'm telling you, if you look at Trump's speech at the ellipse, I don't want to keep going back to it, but I will. He said things, but he may have intended others, right? That sometimes you say one word, but people can understand them differently. It might still be protected by the First Amendment, but there is an intent element. All right, so Mr. Schenck was again a socialist, and he conspired to print and circulate materials that called the draft unconstitutional. And they said that obstructed the draft. And then the flyer said, do not submit to intimidation, assert your rights. A conscript is a little better than a convict. And then he mailed these pamphlets through the Postal Service. And he said, at the end, petition for repeal of the act. In other words, after all this stuff, the sort of call to action was, write to your congressman and say, repeal the draft. Does anyone think that's really what the call to action was, Amy?
Probably not.
No, you want people to resist the draft. We'll do another case about 3 or 4 weeks about draft card burning. That during the Vietnam War, you had all these people burning the draft cards, which was a symbol of protest. And you'll see the government said, wait a minute, we need these draft cards for record keeping, so we're going to ban burning the draft cards. Does anyone think that's the reason why they banned the burning? No, they want to put down this form of dissent. It's obvious, right? So the case goes to the court, and the court finds that the intent was to influence people subject to the draft to obstruct or oppose the draft. All right. And then Holmes, again, this is probably one of the first cases about the First Amendment that really has some salience. Holmes says the First Amendment is not confined to previous restraints. And then he makes a point. He says that in times of war, things are different. Right? In many places, what was said in the circle would have been fine, but not during war. Jonathan, why is that the case? And Holmes does explain this. Why is it that during war, the rules might be a little bit different?
The character of the act is dependent upon the circumstances in which it is done.
Oh, I know that's what he said, but why?
That it's the,
Why should
depending upon the circumstances,
why?
the,
Why should the substance of a constitutional right vary depending on the time that you find yourself in?
because at that time, it may present a clear present date.
You're getting 3 steps ahead. I'm asking a more basic question, right? You know, a right is a right. Why should it vary based on the circumstances you find yourself in?
It just may cause more damage at that particular point in time.
But sure, it could be corresponding damage. Why does that diminish the right? Shouldn't the right be held perhaps even more sacrosanct when there's a conflict as a war? Nick?
I guess because it's a time of where you need unity in a war for your country.
So look, they keep talking about the evils, right? The evils that can result from these evils. What are these evils? The evil, right?
Like foreign powers,
Foreign powers.
the destruction of their own government.
Well, let me ask you a question. Let's say that there's no war going on, right? And there's no draft. And I come out and I say, the draft is unconstitutional. What would be the effect of that speech? Anything?
Minimal.
Is there any evil that would result from saying the draft is unconstitutional, there's no draft? No, that's like a law review article, right? No one cares. But now there is a draft, and I make the exact same statement. What evil would flow from that statement, potentially?
Well, the government's probably fearing breaking down like within their own country,
Right.
rather than focusing.
Right, exactly. Good. So, I mean, what Holmes is basically saying here is that it's not that the content of the right varies, but the evils that can flow from the exercising the right will differ on the circumstances. Right? There's an old maxim. It's from Cicero. I'm going to translate it. I don't remember the Latin, but it says, in times of war, the laws fall silent. In times of war, the laws fall silent. Scalia's quoted in various cases. You can find it. And it's the whole idea that, you know, we can all talk about rights and liberties, all this good stuff, but when there's a war going on, people tend to say, all right, let's button up, shut up, and move on. Of course, wars may last for a long time, and maybe people who were in power during the war might seek to abuse those rights. But there's this sort of notion that, well, you're in war, stop, keep calm and carry on, right? Stay low. Who said that? Keep your head down? Who said that, right? Keep your head down. All right, with me. All right, so then Holmes uses this very famous line, which everyone misquotes. He says, the most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. Keyword there, falsely. People always drop that part. If there's actually a fire, you can say, there's a fire in the movie theater. You're allowed. That's actually a good thing. If there's a fire, is there fire drills? Do we have fire drills here? I think we do, right? If there's a fire, tell someone. If you see something, say something. No fire drills? We've had one, right? Maybe a couple of years ago we had one. I don't know. Anyway. But you can't falsely shout fire. Why? If there's actually a fire, you're doing a public service. If you lie about it and people start running out and trampling each other, there are no fire escapes back then, you actually cause an evil. So then Holmes gives this test, and I'll read it to you. He says, we look to whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. I'll read it to you again. Whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. And this is a test what's called the bad tendency test, right? What are the consequences of your speech? What are the likely consequences of your speech? This is my question to Ryan, but which is a little bit unfair, right? Is it what you intend, or what are the consequences of that speech? And it's actually kind of both, right? It's how we're using your words. And do your words likely lead to some evils? Right? So I can, again, I keep using the example. I go to an empty field and I scream, F the draft, right? I oppose the war. No one's hearing me. No one cares. That will not have any probable tendency to lead to evils. But again, if I do it in Times Square, or if I go to a rally with 100,000 people in the Washington Monument, there's a natural tendency to lead to those evils. But it's a factor of what am I intending and sort of the circumstances we're being there. So again, if you're putting a 1,000 flyers to an empty field, no one's going to read them. But if you're mailing them to prominent socialists who might be opposed to drafting, it might have that consequence, might have that bad tendency. Holmes says we look to the proximity and degree between the speech and the evils that you're trying to stop. Okay, everyone get the bad tendency test. It's really sort of just like mashup of what's your intentions and what are the likely consequences that flow from those intentions. And by the way, it doesn't have to be imminent. This is an important point. You could put a pamphlet in the mail today that takes a week to mail, and then maybe a month later someone might oppose the draft. That's enough. Clear and present danger does not mean immediate. That by merely putting these sorts of words into the stream of commerce, you are now creating the likely consequence of obstruction of the draft. Jamar?
Is there no cool-off period?
Oh, what a good question. So you'll notice in the 100 cases we're going to know about Brandon or Ohio. Right? We'll say this case, I think next week, I can't remember. And in the Brandenburg case, there's effectively a cooling off period. The idea is if you give a speech that riles people up and then nothing happens, and then they maybe engage in bad stuff like a week later, you're not liable. But under the clear and present danger test, there's not really a demand of a short time frame, right? It can take a while to be still liable, right? So, for example, in this case, they mailed pamphlets. I don't know how long it took to mail a pamphlet. Do you? Right? Days, weeks? I just don't know. And who knows when you read a pamphlet? Right? Under the Brandenburg test we'll study, if you give a speech and they're right there and you say, let's go march, let's go burn down the Capitol, right? Okay, that might cover it. But I say, you know what? We're going to march in Washington next month. Let's have a planning committee talking about it, right? That's not good enough. But that's the Brandenburg test. That's not the Schenck test. By the way, Schenck is not good law anymore. You need to know it, but it's not the controlling. I'm scratching the notes, right? Scratching bad law, bad law. It's not the controlling standard anymore. It has not been for that 70 years or so. 6 years. All right, questions on Schenck? All right, so let's go to another case that's completely implausible. Person who ran for the presidency from jail. That can never happen, right? Eugene Debs, I'm kidding. You guys have no sense of humor.
He got 1 million votes in there.
He did. So Eugene Debs was a prominent socialist who ran for the presidency from jail. He got a lot of votes. He got about 6% of the popular vote, which is, that's not nothing. It's like Ross Perot territory. Do you know what Ross Perot is? Okay. I don't know. I presume nothing. I have to because it just makes my life easier. Okay. Who am I up to? Cody. All right, Cody. What did Mr. Debs do that was so bad? Did he mail pamphlets?
No, I don't think so.
What did Mr. Debs do?
I don't remember. I just remember that it was all about, espionage act as well.
What did he
And it
do?
was related to the draft, like he was trying to keep.
What did he do?
I don't remember.
Dylan, what did Debs do? What did Debs do?
He gave a speech.
He gave a speech in Canton, Ohio, of all places. My goodness, not exactly a populous place. And what did the speech say, Dylan?
Well, kind of along the lines of the draft again. It was like obstructing recruiting and about socialism, and he gave us a story about workers that he went and saw that were being punished for not obeying the rules of the draft.
Yes.
And then he was saying like he wouldn't be a good leader if he didn't go to jail as well or something like that.
Right. So this is a very famous speech. You can find, I think there's a recording of it somewhere. Debs was a very prominent socialist. And he gave a speech about socialism and why it will ultimately succeed. And one of the major selling points of socialism at the time was actually opposition to the war. I guess thinking was, if you're a socialist, you'll never be put to fight into a war. Not exactly, as people in the Red Army might tell you. They were murdered in large numbers. My goodness. But the idea was we need to oppose the government. And he mentioned other fallen comrades who were criminalized for failing to register for the draft. And he said, you have your lives to lose. Reward necessary. You need to know that you are fit for something better than slavery and cannon fodder. And don't worry about the charge of treason to your masters. Be concerned with the treason that involves yourself. Now, again, Debs was a very powerful speaker, right? He could captivate a crowd, right? This was not like a low energy guy. He was high energy, and he could really captivate the speakers he was listening to. And during his trial, he addressed the jury, and he said, "I oppose the war, and I oppose it." He basically conceded the charges against him. He didn't think it was a violation of the Constitution, but he conceded the charges. So I'll come back to you, Cody. How did, again, Justice Holmes wrote Schenck, and then he wrote Debs. How did Justice Holmes handle the Debs case?
I felt like he handled it the exact same way.
Okay, tell me.
Basically, go back to the test of just do the words, is their intent and was there a result? And there was a result.
Okay, good. All right, so this is the analysis. I think it follows, it was only about a month or two later, it was very, very close in time. He says, if that was intended, and if in all circumstances that has probable effect, it's not protected. In other words, if Debs intended to obstruct the draft, and that was its probable effect, the natural consequence, then there's no First Amendment defense. This is resolved in Schenck. And Holmes stresses, though, simply just advocating your opinions is not enough. You have to look at the natural tendency and probable effect of your words. And I want to make this point very clear to you all. If you have someone who's a very gifted speaker, they know how the words will be received. And they know if they say something, they might actually be meaning something else. And they can toe the line. You go look at any effective public speaker, they have the audience in their hand. And I'm talking about, someone in front of 50,000 people. That's hard. How to captivate them, make them feel like you're having a private conversation. Those are the people who call them a demagogue, call them what you want, but they're good. And you know who they are. I don't care who it is, but they're the people. Even like a performer, right? Can stand in front of 80,000 people in a stadium and feel connected to every single one. That's a talent that not everyone has. Pick your artist. I don't care who it is. And what the court's saying is, even those Debs words by themselves may not be that bad, he intended to have this consequence, and the likely natural consequence is those evils, or those evils. Right. Okay. Questions on Debs? This is rare. We have so many cases. This is a large number of cases. Are all very short. So actually the reading's not too bad. I try to keep the reading short. If you see the syllabus, they're mostly short. Might be a couple long ones, but I try to keep it under 30 pages each week, so it won't be too bad. By the way, I teach First Amendment for 2 hours in a block. My colleagues do 1 hour twice a week. I can never do that. It's very disruptive to have a short class, then you break and so on. During COVID, they forced me to do the 1 hour blocks, and I hated it, but here we are. It was so stupid. They made us shorten the class time so there was more time to go between the classes, so you wouldn't be crowding each other in the hallway. Do you remember this? Anyone actually remember this? You remember this, right? Remember the arrows in the hallway? You could go walk counterclockwise in the hallways. You could walk clockwise. Do you remember this? That you had to stay in the same seat in each class, so we would fomites. You remember this? I'll tell you, no one even understands. My daughters explain this about COVID. They'll never understand. It will make no sense to anyone. All right, 6 feet, by the way, completely just made up number. Yeah.
Okay, so it's just bothering me.
Yeah.
I hope it's not a distracting question or like a stupid one. But they keep talking about the evils, but it's not like they've said if like
Good question.
they're like we can really regulate this evils.
What are the
Because
evils?
like, I mean, it's not the same thing as like, they kind of prohibit, like, basically what the founders did with like creating a Declaration of Independence and,
What's an evil?
well, they didn't really say. They said whatever Congress thinks an evil is an evil, is what it sounds like from these cases,
Mhm.
but
Yeah. So I've always had trouble with this phrase, the evils that they're designed. And if you read cases in the 20th century, they use this word a lot. And I think it basically is a judgment that if the legislator, the duly appointed legislature, decides something's bad, that makes it an evil which Congress can prohibit. I mean, the very fact is, so put apart the free speech stuff, right? What if there's a draft office and someone puts a bomb inside the draft office? I think you'd agree with me that that obstructs the draft. I think you agree. Yes. Could Congress make it a crime to blow up a draft office?
it would be a crime by like killing people or like.
Well, say no one's injured. Let's say it's after hours and you blow up the building. No one's actually injured.
Destruction of property.
Oh, destruction of property. Fine. But why? You're obstructing some military effort, right? It's not just you're blowing up a building. It's you're blowing up a federal building that's engaged in the draft, right? So if in the abstract the government can prohibit obstruction of the draft, then the question becomes, how can they prohibit it? In what means? Putting a bomb there's the easy one, right? Shooting a draft officer is easy. It can extend to picketing, right? Let's say that 100 people lock arms and they block access to the drafting office. You're not destroying any property. You're obstructing the draft. Yeah. Can they prohibit that? I think they could. So then you sort of get one step. Okay, so you're not locking arms. Maybe you're just picketing in front of the draft office saying, whoever goes in here is a pig and you're evil, and you sort of shout and you point at people. Are you obstructing the draft office? Maybe people don't want to walk in because you're making a big ruckus. Again, you're not destroying property. I'm sort of going after the bomb to lesser examples. Now you mail pamphlets saying, don't go to the draft office because it's conscripting you to engage in, you're like a slave. If the evil is you can't obstruct the draft, the question becomes, what measures can the government use to prevent that evil? All right, does that help your nagging question or no?
Yes, I just don't get why for sure they can obstruct, like why they can regulate that evil.
Well, are you okay with locking the arms? That's a crime to block access to the building?
If they can regulate it, then I think yes, and I would be like, yes, that's speech.
What about holding up signs saying don't go inside? You think that'd be okay? It's almost like
It makes me think of like is that the slap statutes or the ones that are the abortion ones?
That's what I was going to go there in a minute, right? I mean, people do protests out of clinics. Say if you go inside, you're killing babies, right? Does that discourage people from using it? There have been a number of Supreme Court cases, one called Hill against Colorado, where the government has what's called a buffer zone that says you can't stand within X number of feet of the entrance of a clinic, or you can't stand within X feet of a person entering a clinic, and so on. So there are actually a lot of cases about this exact issue. But the basic issue of why there's an evil, I think we all agree that obstructing the draft is a bad thing. Maybe you don't agree, but it's within the bounds what Congress can deem a bad evil. No, someone happy? That's fine. That's fine. What other questions you have?
Is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
under Congress's war powers, the draft?
It's under necessary and proper.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard him. Right, so this is more of a common law question than a First Amendment question, but what gives Congress the power to even have a draft? That's not an easy question. World War I was actually declared war. Civil War was not. As Lincoln would say, this is not a civil war because we're still united. So it's actually a question of what's the enumerated power to even draft. Now, you do have power to raise armies. That means conscription, not clear. But you probably get under the war power, the declaration of war, and necessary and proper. Right, gives you everything you need. Yeah, so always go back to necessary and proper. Almost everything Congress does is necessary and proper. What else? You will relearn common law this semester. I'm sorry, I won't be able to. I can't avoid it. Yes, sir. Was there your hand? Okay, very good. All right, let's move on. I think we're up to Abrams. So what happens next is kind of like famous in Supreme Court history, where you have Abrams was decided in November of 1919, which is 8 months after Debs. And again, Justice Holmes, okay, I said he's overrated. He's a remarkable person. He served in the Civil War. He was shot twice and survived both times. Who gets shot twice and survives? He's just a remarkable human being. His father's a very famous poet, right? Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., right? Holmes was a judge in the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, gave these very famous lectures on the common law. A very well-regarded judge. His writing was lovely. I'm sure you enjoyed reading his opinions. Those ones were crap, right? Justice Sanford, no one to write home about. But Holmes wrote very well. But often his prose buried the lack of rigor. It's just kind of like, here's what I think, and we use beautiful phrases to describe it. That's Holmes. But in the span of 8 months, Holmes seems to have changed course. Right? Again, in Schenck and Debs, another case called Frowork, in an assignment, but it's the same idea. The court upheld these prosecutions under the Sedition Act. But then we get to Abrams, and we now have Holmes in dissent. Now, Holmes explains why he sort of changed his mind, and we'll get to that in a minute. But there's some other sort of background that I find useful to discuss. Justice Brandeis, you probably remember the name, was a very prominent progressive lawyer. He argued Mueller against Oregon. The case ring a bell? This was a case that had a maximum hour law for women laundry workers. Ringing a bell? It was decided a couple years after Lochner. And the court said, yes, you can limit how many hours women could work. This is one of the more sexist cases in the world. Brandeis had a brief. The Brandeis brief, remember the Brandeis brief? Ringing a bell. Okay, the Brandeis brief said, women are inferior. They are weak. This is in there. He says, women have too much water in their blood. They can't handle weight. They will miscarry. I'm serious. They will have miscarriages if they work too much, right? This is in there, the Brandeis brief. But Brandeis was this progressive lawyer, and he was very prominent. And the story goes, and this is on pretty good authority, that Brandeis had an effect on Holmes. That Brandeis would sort of lobby Holmes to think carefully about free speech and become more of a civil libertarian. That they have these like parlors in D.C. It's an awful place. Don't never go to D.C. I go there for as little as possible if I have to. They would have these sort of discussions and talk about free speech. You had the New Republic, which was a very prominent magazine, which would sort of weigh on Holmes. And some people say that Holmes actually changed his mind, that he didn't actually reconcile Debs, Schenck, and Abrams, that he actually sort of changed his mind. Because once you get to Abrams, Holmes goes the other way and starts being a very vigorous advocate for free speech. Whether Holmes changed his mind or not is actually not terribly important for this class, but I actually want you to see why he articulated his changed opinion. So who am I up to? Jacob, I think you're next. Okay, so what were the facts, please, in Abrams?
This is the one where he was distributing leaflets, right?
Yeah, what were the leaflets saying?
Well, weren't they just talking about Russia and advocating for like Russian rights or something like that?
Yeah. So again, this was 1919. Russia was in war with Germany, and there was the politics were complicated. But he was basically advocating for Russia's position against Germany. That's just the easiest way to describe it. But these were publications promoted by socialists, rebels, anarchists, and so on, and they didn't believe in any sort of government. So again, you're not giving a speech as sort of riling people. You're not writing a pamphlet saying oppose the draft. At most, you are putting out pamphlets that take a position on a foreign conflict. Now, Shania, let me ask you a question, please. What is the argument that the speech should have been criminalized? Why did the government go after Mr. Abrams?
They went after Mr. Abrams because they thought that essentially the leaflets that they were handing out weren't intended to obstruct the war efforts.
How? But did they even mention the draft on them?
I don't
think so. It didn't say, you're better than cannon fodder, right? It didn't say that.
No, it wasn't. But the way that the court explained is that the language was abusive and had like disloyal tendencies in it.
Okay, now we're getting on the right track. Okay, so this is not a case where the overt language of the pamphlet had some sort of anti-government message. Instead, excuse me. Thank you. Instead, what would be the consequence of reading this pamphlet? If they read this, would they feel all warm and fuzzy about the U.S. government, or might they have some doubts about the government? Eric, what's the argument that these pamphlets itself, obstructed or interfered with the American war effort, American government?
I believe the immediate topic of the pamphlets was against troop deployments.
Troop deployments, okay.
In the Eastern Front, and in part encouraged strikes.
Strikes? What kind of strikes?
I believe munitions factories.
Ooh. So it's not about the war directly, it's about the war indirectly. So opposing bomb making. That could harm the war effort, couldn't it? So there was another guy around the same time, his name was Eric Berger, was a member of Congress. And I'm getting in trouble for this one. He actually urged women to not have relations with men who engage in the war. There's an old tradition going back to the Greeks about this one. He was also arrested and charged with criminal activity for obstructing the war effort by urging women not to have relations with people engaged in the draft. Yeah, it happened. Victor Berger, look it up. There's some crazy history. Thank you for that, Eric. The court, and this is by Justice Clark, not Tom C. Clark, a different Justice Clark. And he said, this was not an attempt to bring about a change in government by candid discussion. The manifest purpose, in looking to intend, the manifest purpose of this publication was to create an attempt to defeat the war plans of the government of the United States. So the purpose of this was to create basically chaos, bringing the country under paralysis of strike, thereby stopping the production of munitions. In other words, even though it's not talking about the draft directly, it's urging people to not favor building bombs and the like, and this could have an effect on the war effort. So you see we're going even further. It's not standing from a draft office, it's blocking the production of bombs. We'll do a First Amendment case later, which involves it's a pacifist religion. I can't remember which religion it was, the Thomas First Review Board, where a guy didn't want to make bombs in a factory, and he was being asked to basically make parts to be used for a bomb. This issue comes up a lot. Here it's in the free speech context. The court adds the plain purpose of their propaganda, notice they call it propaganda, was to excite for the purpose of embarrassing our military. So you can see how this case differs from Debs and Schenck, right? It's not just about saying I oppose the war effort. It's about trying to oppose munitions, which then go into war. It's like one level removed, maybe even two levels removed. Okay. But here the court says we apply the bad tendency test. This language was obviously intended to encourage resistance to the United States war. And they urged and advocated a general strike of workers. Remember another case where I studied Youngstown Sheet 2 Company against Sawyer, right? What was the basis of that case? The steelworkers went on strike during the middle of the Korean War. Remember this one? And they shut down the war effort. They said, we can't shut down the war. We need munitions for the war in Korea. By the way, eventually they shut down and the munitions were just fine. So government's very good at talking a big game. Doesn't always back it up. Often happens. Okay. So that's the majority opinion. Questions in the majority opinion in Abrams. All right. Jamar, help us out. So Justice Holmes writes a dissent. The vote's 7-2. Holmes writes a dissent with Justice Brandeis. What does the dissent say? There's actually a lot. This is probably, top 5 most important things on free speech ever written. This is in America, it's probably the top 5, I think. Guess. What did Justice Holmes say here?
Well, Holmes doubles down on his Debs thing and says he won't go back on that.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
It kind of contradicts what he's saying there.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I'll come back to you in one second, I promise. So this is an aspect of judges and real human beings. We don't like to admit we're wrong, right? Right? I'll admit I'm wrong. I'm wrong all the time. John will confess to that one, right? I'm wrong all the time, and I will tell you. And by the way, if I make a mistake, you better tell me. I don't want you to hold it back. I make mistakes, you call me on it. I will admit right away. But not everyone likes to admit they're wrong. Maybe you don't. I don't know. Maybe you do. So Holmes like, I'm not going back. I'm going to double down what he said. Right? I'm going to double down on Debs, on Schenck. But this case is different. Shamar, so why does Holmes think this case is different? It comes out differently than Debs and Schenck.
He said the pamphlets didn't have the requisite intent.
Oh, so it's bad intent. Okay, why did the pamphlets lack the requisite intent, as you said?
Kind of what you were saying earlier is that they weren't directly opposing the war. They were kind of just telling people that they could go on strike.
Oh, okay. So look, I'll defend Holmes. I'm not a Holmes fan, but I'll defend the guy. He makes a distinction. Maybe you don't think it's a persuasive distinction, but he makes a distinction. He maintains that we're still following the bad tendency test, right? You can punish speech that creates a clear, and actually this is imminent danger, not present danger, imminent, which is a very subtle word choice. Anyone notice that? It says not clear and present danger, clear and imminent danger. Aaron, what's the difference between clear and present versus clear and imminent? Help me out here. It's actually very subtle when he did that.
Well,
Clear and present versus clear and imminent.
danger can be obvious and present,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that the effect of the danger is,
What does imminent mean?
it means that it's going to happen right away.
Right away. What does present mean?
It exists.
It might be there. It's around somewhere in the ballpark, right? So I think Holmes is actually ratcheting his test a little bit. So maybe to Jamar's point, he's tweaking. He's tweaking a little bit. He's tweaking the test. But Holmes says the present danger of immediate evil is needed, right? And the pamphlets in this case did not create a present danger of immediate evil. Why? It's almost like a logical chain of events. Okay, these pamphlets may cause a strike. The strike may cause a shutdown of munitions. The munitions may hamper our war effort overseas, and they may obstruct the war. Like it's 4 levels deep. The word from Crimper, attenuation. Does that remember from attenuation? Like if a bad search warrant attenuates, or how much attenuation, the taint. So he's saying this is too attenuated between the pamphlet itself and the actual evils, right, Adi, right? The evils, there's too much of a gap. It's not immediate enough. It's not imminent enough. Cooling off, to use your word a minute ago, right? Is there enough of a cooling off period between the pamphlets and whatever evils might be down the road? And Holmes saying there's too much time that's to elapse. Again, if I throw a bomb in a recruiting office, imminent. If I lock my arm saying you can't enter a recruiting office, imminent. If I give a speech and say you need to resist the draft, maybe imminent, I don't know. But if I put a pamphlet saying we need to support Russian foreign policy and we shouldn't be creating bombs that can be used to destroy their people, there's an attenuation there. And that attenuation, Holmes thinks, takes us out of the bad tendency test. Modern free speech law is more or less based on this, what Holmes wrote here. This is the genesis, is like the root cause of modern free speech law, at least I think. All right. And Holmes focuses a lot on the intentions. What is the intent of Mr. Abrams? Right? If all the intent is to prevent interfering in the Russian Revolution, that's not enough. He's trying to stop American intervention in a war. That is, Holmes says, in the center of what free speech is, about articulating American foreign policy. Right? Opposing a war, that is very essential. Holmes also says the guy got 20 years in jail. That's a long time for some pamphlets. That speech was that punch was way out of whack. And Holmes says, look, even if it's wrong, just give him a nominal punishment. Give him a fine or something. Don't throw him in jail. Now, Mr. Debs was later commuted his sentence. I don't know that Abrams had his sentence pardoned, but 20 years seems like a very, very long time. All right, with me so far. Questions? I'm not done yet with the case. A little bit more. All right, Addie. So then we get to one of the most famous lines in Holmes' opinion, maybe ever. The marketplace of ideas. Just what's this mean? What's he talking about there?
The free trade of ideas. That good ideas will win if you allow them to compete by
What does it mean to allow ideas to compete? Just help me out with that one.
like not to limit them. So that way, if they're both out there, they can compete. Like instead of stifling one by completely getting by not
Okay,
allowing
very good. Holmes is basically using a marketplace analogy for free speech. He says, look, it makes sense to punish your opponents, right? We all know why people do it. Because if you punish your opponent, they can't harm you. Perfect, right? But Holmes says, if you have no doubt of your premise is correct, why do you punish it? Instead, the reason why you sweep away speech is because you have doubts. To allow opposition by speech indicates you think the speech is impotent. But if you punish it, it has strength. And he has this line. He says, the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. The best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. Julianne, is this true? Is it the case? And if you're on social media, my thoughts and prayers with you. I quit several years ago. It's a terrible place to be. Is it the case that the best test of truth is who gets the most retweets? Why not?
So some people will say things that are false but outrageous enough that they catch our attention, and then it just kind of circulates, and we end up questioning
Fake news,
what
right?
happened.
Remember that? Yeah. So I mean, is Holmes just wrong? Is he being naive? I mean, what? Just I don't know. What do you think?
So I think at that time period, it makes sense.
Why? Why might it be different in the 1920s than today?
Well, today we have so much access to information that we are hearing ideas from everywhere. It's not just.
So is it better than when you had 3 newspapers, no TV and no internet? Was that better for free speech?
Maybe not necessarily, but I think now it's more so that we have so many competing ideas that it's hard for those that are quote unquote best to find their way to the top.
All right. Anyone else want to chime in on this one? But the marketplace of ideas in the era of cheap digital speech, does it still work? Where any idiot with a Twitter account can spread messages worldwide? Yeah.
It's entertaining for sure.
Oh, it's entertaining as hell. Yeah, it's lots of fun.
I would say it still works.
So
I think eventually. I think you might get 10, 100 million people retweeting that the earth is flat, but there's still an overwhelming majority of people that would disagree. Even if those 10, 100 million people agree that the earth is flat, I think eventually when they test their theory, they're going to find out.
All right. So, I'm going to have to respond, right? The best test of truth. What is truth? She's sure grimacing on the first day of class. What is? I'm serious. That they keep talking about, if it's true this, if it's false this. It's just maybe philosophy. I don't know. What is truth?
Something that's undisputed.
Undisputed. In politics, is there truth, my friend? In foreign policy, in war, is there truth? You're shaking your head one way or the other. I don't know which way you're shaking your head. Julianne?
I think the problem is that we have 2 ideas of truth. We have the truth of the self and then objective truth, which are things that you can determine with science of maybe this is an accurate theory of why the earth is round or flat. And then the other is this is my true experience and how I view the world.
You ever see the flat earthers on social media? You ever actually see their stuff?
Yeah.
Kyrie Irving is a flat earther, by the way. The Maverick, yeah. He actually advocates for this. The ice wall, you've seen the ice wall, right? Around the edge of the earth is the ice wall. It's actually Antarctica's an ice wall. But the airplanes can't go so high because they can't go above the ice wall. I'm telling you, you want to see truth, go Google flat earth stuff. They are. Remember the guy who built a rocket to test the curvature of the earth and did he kill himself? Yeah, he did. Yeah. You know more about this than perhaps I do.
I don't know that much, but I did see that video.
Yeah, he killed himself. He tried to build a rock through the earth is not curved, and he died. Anyway, all right, enough philosophy for now. So Holmes says the marketplace of ideas is, at any rate, the theory of our Constitution. I always loved that, the theory of our Constitution. This is the same guy who dissented in Lochner and said that there is no theory of the Constitution. The Constitution, whatever people say it is. So, you know, Holmes and Lochner and Holmes and Abrams is like a different human being. Just these are different. You know, I think that Holmes has sort of changed his mind and didn't want to admit it. Okay. He says we should be eternally vigilant against attempts to check the expression of ideas that we find wrong. And then he goes back to the Sedition Act. And he basically says, look, this was never really tested in the courts, but it's thought to be wrong. And that we should not be doubling down on the Sedition Acts, which Jefferson and Madison wrote about many years ago. Okay. Questions on Abrams? Again, really important case. And again, whether you like Justice Holmes or not, he's a very eloquent advocate for free speech. Yeah, Adi?
So it seems like he has more of an issue with the evils that they're trying to, that they're aimed at. Or am I wrong? Am I reading that wrong? Like,
What do you mean?
Like when he's saying, what sentence did you just say?
I'm sorry?
What was the sentence you just said?
I don't remember.
It was eternally vigilant against attempts
Yes,
to
yes.
protect the expression of opinions and love, and talked about the Sedition Act and how, you know, it's been like not rejected like by the Supreme Court, but has been rejected like throughout history. Like we never. But so it sounds like he has an issue. I feel like does he not have an issue with like what it is that they're trying to, like the evil that they're talking about, or is it just that he has an issue with?
I think he agrees that obstructing the warfare is an evil, but that the means here is to attenuate. Again, let's look in terms of gradations, right? Throwing a bomb, bad. Shooting a draft officer, bad. Locking arms, bad. Saying oppose the draft. Okay, you can criminalize that, but opposing foreign policy, you can't do that. You see the sort of the difference in the gradations? Okay. By the way, I think you all know this, but the I transcribed the case with Otter, which is a transcription software. So if you actually go to I'll send you the link later, but the entire class is transcribed, so you don't have to type in verbatim. You really even shouldn't. Okay. Yes, sir.
And for this case, you said it's more important to study Holmes' dissent over the majority.
Well, I wouldn't say more important, but I think Justice Holmes's dissent. It's transcribing everything I say. It is. It's trash. So I think the important point here to sort of stress is how Holmes laid the foundation for modern free speech law. And you will see the sort of marketplace of ideas theme pop up over and over again. But you should know the majority opinion also. It's all fair game. It's all fair game. All right. All right. Abrams, anything else? All right. Let us move forward, please. Next up, Gitlow. Now, what's significant with this case is it's Gitlow versus New York. The prior cases were all federal cases, United States prosecutions. This is a prosecution by the state of New York. And we go back to the issue of incorporation. Who am I up to? No, yeah. Ryan, there you are. So Ryan, just if you can bring us back to common law, what was the incorporation doctrine? Do you remember that? Does that ring a bell?
The original Bill of Rights was only applied to the Bill of Rights only applied to the
you remember what case established that principle?
Incorporation.
No, that the Bill of Rights only limits federal power. I remember the name of the case. It involves a state in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Atlantic, actually. State of Maryland. Big better hint. Anyone?
Jobs be Maryland.
City of Baltimore. What case? Barron against Baltimore, right? I always joked if there's ever a fertility clinic in Maryland called Barron v. Baltimore. Anyway, Barron against Baltimore, right? This was a case by Chief Justice Marshall, I think one of the few cases he got exactly right, which said that the Bill of Rights limits only federal power, and he gave an example. The First Amendment, Congress make no law. So for the first, 100 odd years of the Republic, the Bill of Rights only limited federal power. But then we got the 14th Amendment. And this is a debate that professors don't exactly agree on, and the Supreme Court doesn't agree either. But the gist of the debate is that the 14th Amendment changed the situation. Now, some people argue the Privileges or Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment extended some provisions of the Bill of Rights to the states, some, maybe all. Other people argue that the Due Process Clause did it, that says the government can't deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. What does liberty mean? Liberty includes all the provisions of the Bill of Rights. Did the Supreme Court ever say this, that all at once, all this liberty is extended to the states? No, we have what's called selective incorporation or jot for jot incorporation. The court said, right by right, free speech incorporated, free exercise incorporated. Like Oprah, you get a car, and you get a car, right? Just one at a time. Every right was sort of incorporated one at a time. Gitlow was one of the first cases where the court said that a provision of the Bill of Rights limits state power under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, what made this controversial is we were still in the so-called Lochner era. And the idea that we're going to use the 14th Amendment's Liberty Clause to protect freedom. This was controversial. Now, Gitlow lost, as we'll discuss in a minute, but it almost wasn't even mentioned that, oh yeah, of course the First Amendment applies to the states. The court kind of just did this quietly. All right, Anna, facts, please, if you will, in Gitlow against New York.
Gitlow distributed social literature.
Socialist.
Oh yeah, sorry, socialist.
It might be social, but he was socialist. We'll just be candid.
And he was charged with criminal anarchy.
Criminal anarchy. What on earth is criminal anarchy?
It's a doctrine that organized government should be overthrown by force, violence, or by assassination.
Good.
See of such doctrine by word or written is a felony.
Okay, thank you, Anna. So again, we have all these people who just don't like the American government for one reason or another, and they're charged with these funny sounding, you have sedition, you have espionage, you have anarchy, these very funny sounding acts. So this New York law made it a crime to print, publish, edit, issue, circulate, sell, distribute, blah, 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 any material that advocates the overthrow of the government. So what is the evil here? Overthrowing the government. Now, again, the anarchists often did use bombs. I wasn't being entirely facetious before. They would blow stuff up. That was actually one of their preferred methods of persuasion. They would just blow stuff up. Gitlow was a member of the Socialist Party, and they adopted a manifesto. Right. So, Leighton, what was this manifesto? What did it say? There's always a manifesto. I think Manson had a manifesto. I'm pretty sure. Kaczynski had him. Ted Kaczynski is Unabomber. That ring a bell? Mm-hmm. He blew stuff up in the mail with Al Gore and stuff, right? Typewriter. Anyway, go on.
So it was basically calling for a revolution.
Revolution.
So to go on strikes.
And what was the goal of this revolution? Was it to restore the Constitution?
No, to overthrow.
Oh, they want to overthrow it. Right. I mean, in theory, our nation was birthed from a revolution, right? Independence, tea in the harbor, and so on, right? But this was a revolution of the proletariat, of the common folk. And they wanted the struggle to yield a communist revolution. The struggle is real, as they would say. And he printed 16,000. Get used to it. You're stuck with me unless you drop the class. But when's the drop deadline? It's coming up. Anyway, the drop deadline is before we even met.
I think right now you can drop and get 60% of your tuition.
Oh man, you're stuck with me. I don't like. I'm gonna get canceled for this one. I don't like Monday classes that we have a week off the first week. It just makes it very difficult. We actually considered canceling Labor Day and some other holidays a couple years ago and give you that holiday later in the semester when we actually need it, but we're outvoted. I know. It's just having a holiday the second week of the semester screws up the entire schedule. Plus, we have the ice day. Hey, John, by the way, when it gets cold, we shut down the entire building. So we didn't have class last week, so it was cold. Right? I'm not exaggerating. It was what, like, yeah, it was cold. So we didn't come. Not even there was snow, no ice. It was cold. It was cold. Did anyone lose power? You know, anything happened to anyone? No. All right, wait a minute. We could have lost power. My goodness, it could have happened. The evil, right? The natural tendency of the evil that could have happened. We need to stop it to prevent the obstruction of the roads. Anyway, so Gitlow distributed 16,000 copies. So that's how you bring the energy at 10 p.m. Right? He brought 16,000 copies of his manifesto, and he argued that prosecuting him was against the Constitution. Okay. So what's important here is, did his publication, I think we're back to Amy, did his publication actually lead to a revolution over the government?
No, there was no evidence.
Of course not. Of course not. It's silly, right? Did this law just punish saying these words in the abstract? Yeah. So it seems that the New York law went even further than the Espionage Act, right? It didn't even matter if the consequence would actually lead to this, right? It was enough that it could have, right? That merely by stating this doctrine of overthrowing the government, it could lead or imply force could happen. And so as a result, the court upheld the conviction. And the court articulated a stance of deference, that we must give deference to the statute. If you remember United States against Caroline Products, that ring a bell, footnote 4? This is an early progenitor of that, the idea of that we need to defer to the government, and unless there's some really good reason why we have to stop the statute, we have to leave it on the books. So again, the majority opinion says this is just this is just Abrams, Debs, Gitlow, Singh, all in the same ballpark, right? Jonathan, what did Justice Holmes say in his Gitlow dissent, please? Again, with Justice Brandeis, the two of them were just dissenting all the time. Jonathan, let me ask the question a little differently. Was there a clear and present danger, perhaps a clear and imminent danger?
No.
No, why not?
I think for the same reason that it's just a, what do you call it? It's just a publication. It's like the leaflets.
Right. What's the, we talk about attenuation. What's the link between a manifesto and a communist revolution in the United States government? Like, how many things have to happen between you go from a manifesto to a revolution?
It's got to influence people. And
Yeah.
Together.
Yeah. So I think even under Holmes's clear and present danger test or the clear and imminent danger, there's such a huge gap between the evil and the writing, right? If we are actually concerned with overthrowing the government, this manifesto is not going to do it. Now look, let's be clear. Every revolution starts with a manifesto. Not all are successful, right? We had one, it's called the Declaration of Independence. That was a manifesto. It was successful, which is why we kind of read it every year on the 4th of July. But if not, it was treason. Well, let's just not kid ourselves, right? It was said that with the Declaration, we can hang together or hang by our necks, right? I mean, if the Declaration didn't work, they would have been all hung for treason. We called it a Declaration because it worked, right? It was successful. But what Holmes is saying is you can't punish something that's so inchoate, if I can use a phrase, right? It's too early in the genesis. All right. And Holmes again doubles down. He says the harm is too remote, and this is mere publication. We cannot do this. All right. Any questions on Gitlow? All right, Nick. Last case. A lot of cases today. My class, a lot of red flags. So is this case, right? Stromberg against California. What happened here?
There's basically a statute in California that prohibited the showing of red flags, red bandanas.
Right. So I mean, this wasn't a blood crib thing, right? Why were they? You can tell I love my job. Why was California banning red flags?
It was supposed to be sympathy for communism.
The Soviet flag was red, right? You've all seen the red flag with the hammer and the sickle. Right? You've seen Rocky. What was Rocky 2 or 3? Right? You've seen Rocky, right? Okay, good. 4. Oh, thank you. Which was one? The remakes were not. I like some of the remakes. Creed was good. I like Creed. Right. All right. So it was a crime to show the Soviet, basically a red flag, Soviet flag. Why did California make this a crime?
I guess they felt that there were going to be evils coming from that.
Evils, yes, this is our favorite word. And what would be the evil of showing a Soviet flag in 1931?
You could be a spy. You could try to halt war efforts or be.
Could showing a Soviet flag affect the American government?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, this is a California case, right? What would the effect of showing a Soviet flag in Los Angeles be? What would that actually do? Showing a mere flag, just a piece of red cloth.
I guess it could show maybe weakness in the country that they're not.
Yeah.
Isn't that the issue of the case? Is that it's so vague we don't know why?
That's what I'm getting at, right? It's not entirely clear what showing a red flag would even have done. At most, it might show that there's some support for the communist nation, but what's the linkage, the sort of attenuation between showing a red flag in Los Angeles, I think it was LA, I'm just making it up, and actually overthrowing the U.S. government? I don't imagine there were many American flags flying in Moscow. I think that's probably not the case, and I'm sure they had a free speech clause in their constitution. But Scalia would say it's not worth the paper it's written on. All right, so this is actually not written by Justice Holmes. It's by Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes. Remarkable guy. He actually was on the Supreme Court twice. First time he was appointed, he resigned to become the Republican candidate for president, former governor of New York. And then he came back later as a Chief Justice. Really remarkable guy. Excellent beard, even better than John's beard. Right, it was a really impressive beard. So we're friends. I couldn't grow a beard if I tried. Just nothing would come out. All right, so it's absolutely nothing. Like just you. If I didn't shave for a week, you wouldn't even know. All right, so Cody, walk me through Hughes' opinion, please.
What are you wanting?
What's the analysis? I don't know.
Basically what we just talked about.
We just talked about. Oh my goodness. Okay, what did we just talk about?
The fact that it's like super remote. Like it's really getting what Holmes was saying, and the other opinion is that we've just gotten too far away, too far removed.
Right. Good.
The threat is not there.
Okay, good. Thank you, sir. Maybe it was an unfair question. He says the statute is so vague and indefinite, it's not even clear what they're trying to do here, right? You're merely just displaying a red flag, which might have sympathy for some country. That's unconstitutional. This is probably the first case that declared unconstitutional a state law on First Amendment grounds. I say probably because I haven't studied all of them, but generally this is understood to be an important case. And in fact, footnote 4 actually cites Stromberg as an instance where if a law intrudes on the First Amendment Bill of Rights, we have heightened scrutiny. Remember this? This is actually one of the cases that's cited in footnote 4, which is also by Justice Hughes, if memory serves. Okay. All right. Let me sort of summarize a bit. When we're talking about this class in particular, again, a lot of the doctrine is just sort of made up. And I don't say that in a critical fashion. That's simply just how it developed. Justice Holmes had some discussion for the Alien Sedition Act and perhaps how the framers understood free speech, but most of these cases are not. It's sort of jurisprudence on the fly, where judges develop doctrine based on values. Why do you need a clear and present danger to punish speech, right? Why can't we just have the British model? They can punish speech before or afterwards. And invariably, it's based on the values of the various judges who decide these cases. And the trend after Holmes, and this is a trend that continues to this day, is we favor broader protections of free speech. And we have very broad protections of free speech that are not really supported by anything in history. It's just a judge's own sense of values. All right? So again, Debs and Schenck articulated the sort of clear and present danger test. Starting in Abrams, Justice Holmes seemed to sort of walk the other way. And Justice Holmes articulated what might be called a clear and imminent danger test, right? Imminence became the important threshold factor, that you have to have a clear linkage between your speech, your words, your intentions, and the evil, right? There has to be some sort of clear linkage. If the attenuation is too broad, the government can't banish it. And then we get to Gitlow. The court found there's enough of a linkage. Holmes said no. But Stromberg is really kind of the more modern statement. Unless you can actually show what the evil is you're trying to prohibit and how your law gets you there, it's unconstitutional. This was often called means and scrutiny. Does that sound familiar from common law? Right? The means, what are you doing? The end, what are you trying to achieve? What's the evil? Not evil, right? Evil, right? The evil you're trying to stop. And unless there's a good enough of a fit, a close enough of a relationship between the means and the end, the law is unconstitutional. In modern terms, we will talk about strict scrutiny. You have to have a very close fit. I mean, what does narrowly tailored mean? You ever think about that? No, you haven't. Right? So the way I explain it is like a suit, right? You can have a suit that's off the rack from Kmart. It doesn't really fit you. It kind of just hangs off your body. That's not narrowly tailored. It kind of fits, but not really. Or you can go to a tailor, and they can fit a suit perfectly to your body, and it's narrowly tailored. What is the fit between the means and the end? How close is the relationship between what you're doing and what you want to accomplish? That is a question of scrutiny. Strict scrutiny for free speech demands a very close fit between the means and the evils, the ends. The red flag law did not cut it because you couldn't even say why you're banning this red flag. Holmes said having a manifesto about, communist revolution, there's not enough of a fit between the means and the ends. But telling people, do not go to the draft hall, do not register. In that case, there's a close fit between the means and the ends. And that is sufficient, in Holmes's view, to punish the speech. All right, questions? All right. Our next class will be on the 29th. We will do a couple topics about when is speech unprotected. So one case called Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, also called fighting words. Then we'll do the Brandenburg test, which is about inciting imminent, keyword, imminent violence. U.S. against O'Brien is draft card burning. Texas against Johnson is American flag burning. RV versus St. Paul is cross burning. So a lot of burning stuff next week. That's my fire class. All right. Fire is enough. All right. Anything else? Have a good evening. I'll see you all next week. Thank you so much.